So what Ninamani, and that is hello and how are you in Ghana language. So I'm on the lands of the Ghana people, which is the Adelaide Plains in South Australia. And I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands that we're calling in on from today, and recognise and respect their cultural heritage beliefs and the relationships to land and water, and acknowledge that we all benefit from the ongoing custodianship of the Indigenous peoples who have looked after these lands that we all live on since the beginning of time. And yeah, just want to also acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. So welcome everyone to this webinar. So this is really the opportunity to share or ask questions and use the collective brains trust, although, well, I'll introduce the committee members. So some of the committee members have offered to kind of lead this session. So I'm Saras. I am one of the co-coordinators of the Conservation Coaches Network, so for Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, the coordinating committee. So I'll just we can just very quick, or I'll just introduce the other committee members. Maybe you can just put your hand up and then we'll go into a little bit of an icebreaker and we get to know a little bit more about people. Leah Feuerhart and Hao Jin are co-coordinators with me, and Hao Jin's based in Aotearoa. We've also got Claire Doherty, Pip Walsh, Sarah Pearson, Natalie Holland, Bridget Madingley, and Frank Weisenberger, who are also on the committee as well. And today, I think it's Claire, Pip, and Leah are going to, and Sarah are going to be the main people kind of answering questions, but there's a lot of experience in the room, so I think it will be sharing about what we've, answering the questions jointly. So before we jump in to asking questions, I did put together a bit of an icebreaker. So what I'm gonna, this is actually from a resource that hopefully all of you know about, but if you don't, Session Lab is like an online agenda making tool that you can use, but they also have a great library of exercises that you can use for facilitation. And so I guess it's a facilitation kind of tool that enables you to build agendas, but also has this great library. So I had a look in there to think about, to look at their icebreakers and chose this one. So essentially, I'll share the picture. So essentially, the task at hand is for you to have a look at this ship and all the people on it. So they're like different numbers. And then just have a moment to think about, in the context of the conservation standards or healthy country planning, what person in that image most reflects how you feel. And so, like, for instance, I kind of feel at the moment, maybe I'm feeling like a number 7. So I've kind of, part of the coordinating committee, use the standards and healthy country planning a lot. And I'm always looking at kind of what's on the horizon, maybe, what can we do to improve them, or how do we also make sure that more people you know, kind of get on board and start using the tools and the framework that's available. So if you just want to have a think about how you feel at the moment, it can change from day to day, I'm sure, but in the context of using these adaptive management frameworks, so the number and just a sentence in the chat as to why you've selected that kind of person, what they're doing in the image. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Okay. Okay. Okay, so I see Michael's thinking, you're thinking number 12 to running to catch the ship.
Yeah, that's right. The big project that we're doing is sailing no matter what, and I'm running to make sure that conservation standards is as much a part of that as possible.
Great, thanks for sharing. Aha, so now I'm trying to look, where's number 13, going rogue. The kind of pirating things. And I remember when I first did the training, it was like, yeah, one of the things is always like one of the goals is to pirate things. So when you find something that's really useful, bring it into the process.
Yep, and I'm not following any given process at any given time. It's bits from all the different ones. So
yes, as it needs to, it's an adaptive management framework that you have to adapt. Sarah, like, yes, the 7 as well, looking for opportunities. Oh, on the lookout for what others are doing. I like that. Bridget. 8. So, oh yeah, sometimes, yes. Yeah, that is the role of a coach, is to get things unbogged so it can, yeah, keep the momentum going. Nice one. 4 and 5. Yes. Yeah. Yes, so it changes from time to time. Flying the flag, like that. Okay. And how Jin's also, yes, sometimes, yeah, helping to get unstuck, but making sure people stay up ahead and looking ahead for Michael. Claire also varies. Oh, I like, yes, yeah, the dreaming, nice one. Number 19, yeah, well, I guess it's up to us to figure out. Right, that was interesting to get to know a little bit about what people are thinking. So now we can actually move into the session. So I'll hand over to the Claire and Pip to maybe kick us off.
All right, Claire, you've still got your microphone turned off. So while you turn that on,
oh, yeah,
we had a few pre-questions. So I think, Michael, we had one from you sort of saying you were at least feeling you needed more familiarity with the assess phase. And in a moment, I might get you to just talk to us a little bit more about that. But the other one, which might be quite easy to answer, was I think Anne or Annie, this was yours, how to separate activities from strategies, and sort of particularly thinking about how do you actually show the development of theme-based plans in roadmaps. Have I got that right?
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm in a very noisy office, so I'll switch my speaker up soon. Yeah, I think a lot of plans quite often get the strategies muddled up, and or strategies and activities muddled, and there's a sort of blurry line, especially like when you're developing like a weed management plan. Like some of our logics have got develop a weed management plan and implement a weed management plan, whether that's a good approach or whether you should actually say, look, you're developing a weed management plan and then scaffold all your steps underneath your weed management plan, if that makes sense.
So that kind of like working out, is the weed management plan your strategy, or are some of the subsidiary activities big enough to be strategies on their own?
Yeah, well, what can give you a guidance of like where to put a line in the sand and go, no, let's package that up a bit differently and separate it.
I think I might just invite responses from others on the call.
I'm happy to jump in, Pip. I was just going to have a look at an example, because I'm sure I've had a management plan as one of the intermediate results in a strategy, but I need to go back and have a look at what the actual strategy said. If developed, the weed management plan was one of those first steps to get the detail of what we're going to do and where. So if you give me a second, I'll see if I can pull it up to see what the strategy actually said.
So while she's doing that, Annie, I was thinking I had a couple of thoughts that would sit with this, which is thinking about what's the scale of the activity. So if you're dealing in millions of hectares versus sort of hundreds of hectares, there's probably a bit of a sense whether you want to split things apart or put them together. So a lot of my thinking about, is it a strategy or an activity, is in the context of your plan, thinking about the scale of work. And I would tend, I'm a lumper broadly, so I tend to like putting things together until I know I need to split them apart as a strategy. And again, a little bit of maybe thinking around whether, again, if you're coming up with a weed management plan, again, making sure the team's focused on the priority weeds. So again, they've got those sort of some clear sort of thoughts around their threats. If it's a really big activity, it might be worth thinking about, are there different weeds that would be treated differently by different people using different, so again, sort of playing around with that. How much does it sit together in addressing the threat, and how much does it need different people, different expertise, I guess, is sort of one of my clumping techniques. Leah, did you have your example there, or somebody else?
Yeah, well, I do, but I'd be interested in feedback on this too, because I feel like I'm definitely still learning. So we had a strategy for implement an invasive plant management program. And so then one of those first steps is developing the plan that identifies where the priorities are and, what needs to happen first.
Yeah, that's just using a bush heritage example, what we've found is for some of our strategies, we'd say that developing a plan would be the first step. But we also have to be careful that you don't want to end up with, because then you have lots of plans within a plan. People get confused and there are millions of plans around. But it's still part of the strategy. So it still needs to be, make sure that whatever is in that broader kind of exploration of what that strategy would look like and how all the different information you need to include for that strategy to be successful has to still be and become part of the strategy and activities that are represented in your work plan and in your results chain. So if you have a plan, it can often just end up becoming a separate thing and you miss some of the key kind of pieces of information that need to become an activity within your work plan. So for us, it's really making sure that we differentiate between, and fire management's a good one. We have a separate plan, so to speak, because there's lots of different things in a fire management plan that need to be considered outside of the scope of our general kind of conservation standards process, and what would become a part of our broader strategic plan and work plan. But all of those activities that are identified within the fire plan have to end up back in that strategy and in our results chain, and in our work plan as well. So they're kind of, what am I saying? They're the same, but you may say develop a plan, but it doesn't mean it's completely separate to anything else in that strategy.
Has that helped, Danny, or did you need more clarification?
It helps a bit. It's like I'm probably leaning towards how you do it. Like I would prefer to lump it rather than split it up too much. And yes, you will have these plans that are going to have a different level, a different approach and a different level of detail. I don't think that's unavoidable. Like applying a weed risk assessment to identify which priority weeds you're going to focus on. I think that fits inside a weed management plan. And yes, it does need to come back into the logic. But yeah, I think we can get a little muddled and sort of go develop a plan, and then implement a plan becomes a strategy, and you go, is that splitting it up a little bit too much?
Yeah, so probably thinking about it, developing the plan is, in my mind, almost never at a strategy level. That's an activity within a weed management strategy, because what you want to do is actually manage them, not just develop a plan. And it's a bit, again, sometimes people will have, and there's no absolute hard and fast rule, but research activities or communication activities. And again, it's worthwhile thinking about whether those things are separate or whether they're part of the strategy. And an old Greg Lowe test used to be, you'd go back and look at your strategy and say, if implemented, will this strategy significantly address the threat or improve the viability? So that kind of helps you think about the scale of a strategy versus the scale of an activity.
I think that's a good guide. Yeah.
I might hop in with something probably more a thought that is prompted by the discussion more than anything, is around you could potentially have like a strategy that is around integrated planning, and that in itself be a strategy where you might be looking for an outcome where a whole lot of sort of planning systems are integrated for a better outcome for the target. That I think would probably be, would you think that might be a strategy level with multiple activities, outcomes, etc. in there? But that's where you're really focusing on not just having your plan in isolation of all the other players and plans that might impact on the target's outcome. Is that, just wondering if my thinking has sort of got something happening there?
I think, Sarah, what you're flagging there, and we do see this, is often you have what you'd call sort of, they're sort of precursor strategies in a sense. So they're things you need to do, but they won't get you to the ultimate outcome. And again, you can show that diagrammatically on the roadmap.
Yeah, yeah.
But you might want to show that other strategies will need to come into play to get you right through the roadmap, even if you're not showing them in full on that particular roadmap, from a sort of illustration perspective.
You'd usually figure it out once you start implementing your plan that you've probably overthought something and it's all a bit too complicated. I think the biggest thing is to try not to overthink something. So if you can overplan, particularly a results chain, it's pretty easy to get confused about where you're starting and where you're stopping. So best thing to do is put it down, walk away, and then come back.
Yeah. And the other thing, Anne, is again with this group, if you're feeling like you're getting overwhelmed or it's kind of not working for you, get somebody to peer review it for you, who knows the system, who might just look at it and go, oh, have you thought about this?
Yeah, yeah, we tend to do that, but I think sometimes there's lack of agreement of where things sit.
Yeah,
and
but sometimes just
nice
getting
to have
somebody
some broad guidance and go, in general, this is
in
how
general,
we could treat it. Like I like your general rule of like, if implemented, will it improve the viability of the target? If there was some like general rules like that, we could pull out and go, if it's a a task that can be completed or something like that in a short time frame, yeah, maybe it's not so much a strategy, it's an activity. Some general rules I think would help get everybody on the same page, especially like in a workshop context where you're trying to get people on the same page.
So Annie, have you been in the workshops doing any of the strategy rankings?
A little bit.
Yeah, so it can be quite helpful just at that point to get people to clump things together.
Yeah.
Just in that strategy ranking, because again, you're looking at its impact, and that's where you're really asking that question: if we implement this, will it actually have the impact we want?
Yeah, I'm more often at the end of the chain, so I'll get some at the monitoring side, and then I'll get the plans and go, oh, okay, I would actually restructure this differently, but
yeah,
but that's what we're working with.
Yeah, in a workshop, that's probably where I'd really kind of try and get people to cluster related things together a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Alrighty. Oh, we'll work on some common rules. I think that might help.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this helps in terms of thinking of process. We've been working on, focus specifically on policy, but the kind of process for developing strategies. And one of the things we're getting teams to do is kind of almost do an inventory, like which is the brainstormed list of these are all the potential things we're either currently doing, considering doing based on, what we've observed in the situation analysis or see as opportunities to do, but then go through a process before ranking them of refining them. So doing that sort of grouping exercise of, do these really stand alone? What do we mean by them? Can we clarify exactly what we mean by them? And quite often finding that you're grouping a number of things up during that process when you come to actually articulating what the actual strategy is before then going into a kind of a prioritization process. So that's kind of approach our team's been using with policy teams.
Okay, that's useful. Thanks.
You can see Claire and I didn't practice this beforehand. I was wondering whether we might move Michael on to your thing. So I think you just generally said the assess step was the step that you wanted a bit of help with. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about some of the things that are maybe on your mind when you're thinking about that step?
Sure, yeah, thank you. And look, thank you for the opportunity to come to this group. We're sort of running fast towards our first workshop, where we will tackle the assess phase. And then we have a period of time, about 6 weeks after that, where we will have a second workshop to try to tackle the plan phase. We need to give it, we need to give it some space because it's hard to bring such a big group of people together. And I guess I'm struggling with the balance maybe of what parts are okay to do on the desktop in our team, and what parts really need to be done in the workshop. And I'll just make it clear that Leah's been helping us with this process, and she will have talked to some of my team members recently. So yeah, I guess there's a desire. I want to bring as much data and science knowledge to the table as possible for that first workshop. But then we're conscious we might run into the situation where the workshop hasn't gone through all the values. Maybe the participants haven't finished situation models for every threat value interaction. And so I'm thinking after the first workshop, we'll be doing a bunch of ground truthing of the actual outputs of the workshop, collecting evidence and evidence base to support maybe those causal chains, those situation models, but also maybe just doing some ourselves, and then maybe coming to the second workshop and saying, hi, we filled in the gaps for you. What do you think? So I don't know, just some general advice around that. Thank you.
Will I start?
Go, Claire.
Thanks, Michael. That sounds great. I think from my perspective, I think it's really good because that's a lot of information for people to take in. And as long as you can get through the process steps for me, say a target example, when you can kind of demonstrate how the process goes through a target. So you might be able to get through some other targets too in that first workshop, but maybe not all of them. But as long as you can get through you're looking at a target, looking at attributes, indicators, whatever the steps are that you want to follow within the standards, and kind of help guide the team through all of the steps within the process. So the same with get to threat analysis, and then you do a simple situation analysis. I'd always recommend doing one of those for sure. And then work through a full threat rating, but don't try to do it all really quickly, but make sure that you get into the detail. Work through a full strategy, maybe just one example of a results chain, because I often feel that people walk away and they're enthused and really, we've done a lot of work and it's been really great, but you can't hold all of that information in. And I think it's really important that people walk away with that they've got ownership of the information that has been gathered for the day, but they also have a better understanding of what those process steps are as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, Claire, I'll just pick up on that. I think that ownership point's a really important one, particularly for, like, you've got a huge group. I think you've got about 40 people, right? And across your organisation coming. So for a lot of them, it will be new. And so getting them involved in the detail for all of the targets is not necessary, but just that having them involved. So like Claire said, they understand the process. They can have their say around, we think that target needs to be in there, or that threat, so it's that first meeting's really part of about building that ownership piece. Yep.
Great. Yeah.
And I was going to say, often, again, if you've got a big group, you can actually simplify the questions you're asking. So rather than doing the full viability analysis, is actually just give people the poor, fair, good categories and ask them to think about what they'd measure to understand that, but also then try and get them to sort of say what would look like poor, what would look. So again, you're not tangling them up in attributes, for example.
Yeah.
You just sort of, you can simplify it. Again, with threats, you might sort of push through a little bit more quickly and then have to go back and have a look at it and maybe do some mapping to kind of go, what sort of scope does it have? How widespread is it? So you might not get all of those answers in the workshop, but you've kind of got something to go through with. And I always call it, this and situation analysis, you get I call a rich soup. There's lots of things floating around in that conversation. So it's making sure you grab those things to follow up on. I'm watching at the moment a Miro board, and I've been doing a different process with a team where they were supposed to have done some viability assessment sort of before or during the last workshop, which they didn't get to, but they're all working on it now before we do our next one. And again, at the start, we'll just go back. So I think your idea of getting started, maybe getting some smaller groups of people who are happy to work on particular things in that 6-week break. But then having some way of others being able to see that either as the process goes through or at the start of the next workshop. And we've done lots of what I call that sort of, here's what we think, what do you think? Because I think that's, when you're thinking about adaptive management, that's almost always what you're doing, because you're enabling people to come into your process and say, here's the story, here's what we were thinking. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah, certainly.
I think starting to build that in right from the beginning, that's the process. You might get smaller groups of people to work on things and then bigger groups of people to look at it. People might come in and out of the process, depending on sort of interest and expertise.
And
Okay.
I'd reiterate from my perspective as well, like you're never going to get through all of the content in a workshop ever. It's just the reality of how it works. But if you can get people familiar enough, it's almost like they're learning the language of this is what the process is, this is what the terms are, so that when you come back next time around, they can understand what's being asked of them, even between workshops. And the other thing, and I don't know your context or the organisation or the process you're going through, but if you've got 40 people attending and you're going to have multiple sort of targets that you're working them through, if you've got multiple facilitators, you could have different groups working on different targets, which means you get through more in the workshop. Absolutely. You can do a peer review so that if people want to have a say on more than one of those. If they're in a group that they want to be in multiple groups, that they can report back and still have the opportunity to comment on those other groups. But then you'll get through more in the workshops. But I still think, as others have said, trying to at least take them through all of the steps in the process so they understand that and know then if there's homework to be done before the next session, they understand what that homework is and how it all fits together.
Great, great. Yeah, so for your context, this is for the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority.
Okay, yep.
And we're working on a new plan of management for the Southern Great Barrier Reef,
Yep.
Explicitly with the traditional owner groups of that part of the coast and Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service as part of the core team.
Yep.
Yeah, so, and yes, so thank you very much for your comment. We are planning to split people into groups, and we've been tinkering around with forcing people into groups versus allowing people to self-organize. But there's a few people we want the seagrass people in the seagrass group.
Yeah.
If seagrass emerges as a value and that sort of thing. So yeah, so thank you. Yeah, we're working through something like that.
Awesome. The only thing I would add, and no doubt if you've got others working with you, they may have given you this advice. The only thing I would suggest is for the workshop, if people sort of self-organize, to make sure they stay with that group through, because it can really slow down the conversations if they've got to catch up new people joining for different steps in the process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yep.
Yeah. And the other one, I noted your mention of the conceptual models. Again, probably my tip would be really just get people to focus on the highest ranked threats, because they'll want to focus. One of the big things, and you guys would definitely find this, is people want to have really long lists of threats. So getting them to consolidate them, or getting them to be a bit more rigorous about what the most serious ones to address are.
Yeah, okay. Yes. As an organization, we have a list of 46 threats.
I didn't know it would be that bad. I was thinking 20 something.
No, yeah. So yeah, we have our work cut out in terms of ranking those. I mean, that's something we've done as an organization. So doing that as a wider group would be really valuable.
Yeah. And it can be, so Leah, irreversibility trips people up, but getting people to think about scope and severity can really help them sort of unpick some of that, and getting them to focus on the next 10 years, like not the damage that's happened now. Just keep reminding them that's happened in health.
Right.
So again, you're not double counting threats, which, some threats have largely operated and you might get some incremental problems, but you're really dealing with a health issue. So again, trying to get people to sort of come through the end of that, so they feel like the impact of it has been acknowledged, but they can focus on sort of the most serious or sort of more strongly emerging threats.
Yeah,
the threats they're going to be acting on going forward.
Yeah. But 46, Leah, have you had a chance to go through them and work out if some of them are stresses and some of them are threats?
No, I haven't. And that's part of the agenda, I believe, for that first workshop, is for them to do that, have that conversation.
I would probably have that with a pre-thing for people to look at.
Okay.
Just because it'll save time.
Yeah, and in Michael's case, my understanding is that there is a lot of threat assessment work has already happened, because the Great Barrier Reef is already being managed. And so any advice about how that, do we need to kind of have a look at those ones that have already been assessed and put them through the conservation standards lens so that they're being rated the same, or is it okay that they've already been assessed and that's fine? Let's just leave that and do the ones that haven't been done.
Yeah, if there's a consistent threat assessment, again, there'll probably be some level of similarity in that people will look at the scale of the threat and the nature or severity of it. So again, giving people some visuals can really help them think it through. So again, if some of those threats have got sort of associated mapping or sort of visuals that help people understand their impact on some of the likely targets. That will be quite helpful, and relative impact. If you've, again, it's just helping people move on from wanting to hold on to their particular little thing.
Right.
Okay, maybe that can be encapsulated in this, or maybe this is really bothering me, but actually there's a couple of bigger things we really need to get at.
Okay, yeah, I understand. And preparing some of that data in terms of spatial visualizations of the different threats is what I've been working on, and yeah, really keen to get that, as much of that, into the workshop as possible. Obviously, we haven't worked our way down to number 46, but we're trying.
Well, that's, yeah, I mean, again, my tip would be maybe, Leah, if you had a look and had a think about whether some things were likely to be stresses or attributes, and
To help refine that.
Yeah.
It's a good idea. Thanks, Pip.
I guess in reality, Michael, it's probably not that many threats, to be honest, in the world. Threats come from every angle. It's not too bad.
I could pop in the chat our figure from our risk assessment, so you guys can get a feel. But I don't want to take over the meeting too much.
well, you're on a different end of planning from many of the projects I work with, which is much better resourced.
Yep.
Nobody ever feels well resourced, but
Yeah, we're very lucky in that we've had so much. There's so much work that we've done as an organisation before we picked up the conservation standards that can feed into the process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So look for similarities. If you've already done things, don't double up on things and redo them if you don't feel like you need to. Have Leah, have you guys had a look at the project assessment sort of score sheet to kind of go where are the weaker areas? And
no, we haven't. It's we're providing a little bit of support, but not kind of heavily involved. So
okay. Was that for the project team that can be helpful to kind of go, we're pretty comfortable with threat assessment, for example, or we're pretty comfortable with this bit. We really want to go here.
Okay, great. Yeah.
And how are you feeling, Michael? Does that help, or have you got any clarifying questions after the conversation?
No, that's fantastic advice. Yeah, I'll digest and talk to the rest of the team. But thank you so much. Yeah.
Have fun.
Thank you. Yeah.
No pressure, but I'm expecting you to save the Great Barrier Reef in the next 6 months.
Oh, that's the
You're
idea.
going to say 50 years.
We did have another question that came through from someone that registered but hasn't arrived today, but I wonder if we discuss it anyway, just in case they look at this afterwards. And it was around the term targets, around, the language of that, I guess, and how important is it to use this term, and are there any tips for getting people comfortable with using the term targets? So does anyone want to jump in and share their experience?
I use whatever term is appropriate in the context I'm working is based my answer. And sometimes, like NRM lingo, in the past it's been assets. In TNC, it's primary interests. Ultimately, it's the thing you care about. But I will use all of them and see which one gets at. I think the most important thing is being able to describe what we mean by it and what the concept is. And the term that we use is not as critical as the actual concept of what we mean by that term. So that would be my take, but I'd love to hear what others think.
There's a kind of global work happening at the moment to look across terminology about how people use. I mean, that's like any language, isn't it? And all words that kind of mean the same, seeing the different, because like you just mentioned then, Nat, you just mentioned like 5 different ways of describing a target. Bush Heritage has been using the word target for a long time. We used to use values. Someone in our board said, I don't like that word. So we started using targets. Now people are saying, I don't like targets. So as long as everybody understands, you know, what that kind of is, that it's the things that we care about, hopefully we can, doesn't really matter what term you use, as long as you've got support within your group. They've all kind of agreed that they're happy with that terminology.
So Amy, I think you are the person who asked the question, if you're watching this later. The other thing you asked was for help talking to people about it in the group. And often what we do is have a glossary for what it means now. So Healthy Country Planning in particular has a glossary, which I think, Frank, you might be able to answer this, is up on the thing. So it actually defines a number of the key terms in sort of simple terms or sort of straightforward terms. So targets, things you care about, etc. And often working with a new group, we'll actually go through and decide what the word is. So, you know, one of the unusual ones, we'd done some work in Timor-Leste, we'd translated the word health, and actually it didn't really mean what we needed it to mean. So, you know, in the workshop, we just changed it to the word that made sense to everybody. So definitely you should feel totally comfortable adjusting the name of things. You just want to keep, as everybody said, the sense of it. But yeah, it's absolutely something we've done before.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and share a bit of recent experience that I have coaching a team as well. And so, with the resource use and management and people involved in sort of the wider term of conservation in New Zealand, like some of the people are really sensitive to the word conservation. And so some groups anyway. And so we've just tried to, and being the open standards and short form as conservation standards. And so we've also tried to mitigate this by having a discussion pre-hand and saying that this is a framework that is based around values or things that we care about. And it doesn't matter if we, utilize it in different contexts, in different kind of sector, it's still based around the values that we care about. So, yeah, that's how we sort of go around that.
All right. Any other questions from people on the call? So Michael and Anne, you get first call because lots of the rest of us are on the committee.
Thank you. I did just pop that thread assessment in the chat. If anyone wants to give us feedback and tell them half of them are pressures, that would be great.
Well, I might have another question if there's time or there's a gap. So in the conservation open standards, when it comes to looking at results, your objectives and outcomes, it's got like a percentage completion. I'm wondering how people, how much success they have with using that as a measure of progress, or whether you aim for alternative measures of how you're doing in that space. So I'm finding for many outcomes and results that you're aiming for, a percentage completion's a very difficult thing to define and use.
Claire? No?
Can you repeat that?
I was just thinking Bush Heritage does lots of reporting, so I was just thinking it might be one for you.
Yeah, because not many people are getting to that stage of reporting on the results of their plans. So in the open standards in Marathi, it's got like a % complete for an objective or a key outcome that you're aiming for. I'm just wondering how people have success in using that. I'm finding that for that, I'm just saying, yeah, use % lightly, but we're going to have to come up with other measures of tracking our progress in that area.
Yeah, we don't use it. I mean, used in really simple examples. And if your unit for an indicator is %, it kind of makes sense. You use a percentage, but I think you're just making stuff up. It looks nice in a dashboard, but
yeah.
we're still talking about whether or not that could be something we would use in some very higher level things for dashboarding, but we don't use that specifically in our projects. Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. It really depends on what your goal statement is, because sometimes we may have a goal that's it's not specifically related to one indicator, so you're kind of relying on a bit of a roll up of several indicators to tell you that you've met your goal, which is not something you can easily, because you're relying on algorithms and roll ups and things. So it's I'm not answering your question, Emma. I'm just saying that it's really tricky, but it really depends. If you've got quite a clear goal that we want 100 black gloved wallabies by 2025, it's really clear you can have your measures, what you've actually gone out and measured can be how you're tracking. But in terms of roll-ups, I mean, we're still kind of thinking about the best way to do that. Does anyone else in the call use that percentage? Yeah, see, it's just not really that useful, I don't think. It's just another guess on top of a whole bunch of other things. I think sometimes that might look good in pretty coloured pie charts and things, but not.
So that's where I think it could do with some alternatives and different guidance about how you can work in that space.
Yeah. So, and I think in terms of monitoring the sort of activity level, you've got the kind of complete, on track, etc. type of categories, which I think a lot of people do use. And it's color coded, and that's all pretty obvious to people. I think, again, Bush Heritage is one of the organisations which fairly regularly does kind of like the reserve scorecard I'm thinking of, Claire, which I looked at the other day and noticed has been designed to look much more pretty. But that's a nice example of trying to report much more at the kind of target or threat level.
Yeah, that's sort of what I've been trying to do too, and I looked at that as potential role models. But again, it's like if we're like talking to multiple groups to try and get them to come up with processes, it would be good to have some other working model than a percent complete.
Yeah. The other report card thing I used to quite like was, and I'm trying to think what it was called. It was the Healthy Waterways in Southeast Queensland used to issue subcatchment reports. I used to like their scorecards. So there's a few examples of people pulling together quite nice visuals around ultimate results.
Yeah, and Bridget's put a good suggestion in the chat there as well.
And so I work on a team that focuses specifically on policy, so I'm going to qualify my response with that. But we give advice to teams on like the outcome for policy is often a binary. Did we get it or did we not get it? Like, did we get the policy in place? Did the legislation pass? Whatever. Whereas the progress towards that might be more a Leichhardt scale, where there is some sense of scale of, well, how much support did we need in order to get that? How far do we think we've got to get towards that? So our team sort of talks about the difference between, you know, what you might measure for the policy outcome, and quite often that being a binary type response, versus what you're tracking to know if you're making progress towards that, which is likely to be more of a Leichhardt type scale approach.
I think, Annie, I know your question comes back to Mirati a bit too, doesn't it? Like, so, you know, if you're using Mirati to do the reporting currently, there is only the % option for an objective in there. And does anyone know if there's, like, can we give that feedback back to FOSS, or, you know, like, so if we're talking about using other ways instead of %, like, how do we actually get the system that supports the conservation standards to do that better? Like, what's the avenue for that?
Well, I think it's that, I mean, they'll take any suggestions on board. It's like I'm assuming it's the way it's been historically, where if everybody is asking for one thing, they'll put some effort into achieving that. And it's interesting that people on this call, probably a few people that dabble in the Mirati space, and don't even bat an eyelid at the objective %, because it's not useful. And I wonder how people are using that out there, and big wider world, but we could certainly let the developers know and get some feedback from them how it's being used and how they kind of anticipated it should be used. Yeah, hopefully they can add some things. The other thing, I'm just thinking in a bit more detail about how we might show that, and you can see our scorecards are on our website, and so if you haven't had a look at them, get on there and check them out. But the background to that, of course, and we use Marathi, as you know, but to demonstrate that would be the indicators. So we're looking at a goal for a target. We would show in your viability table where you've identified your indicator ratings, getting into the real detail here, where we are now to where we want to be, and we would demonstrate that in a table, so you can kind of see with the arrows and trends going up and down. So that would show you how you're tracking against the individual indicators, and that would then help to then relate that to your kind of higher goal statement. So using the detail that's in the tables and the design of Marathi and pulling them out into our evaluation reports and showing that within that target health discussion.
Yeah, definitely what we're doing, and have looked at the bush heritage scorecards. But it's like, if we're trying to encourage people to use Marathi as a holding house for tracking, and then at the same time we're saying that actually doesn't work, we've got to come up with other tools. That means we've got to build, and that's what we're doing, is building templates, reporting templates, which is a bit similar to the scorecarding, but that's time consuming and something that's hard to roll out generically to lots of different groups. So maybe if Marathi could have like instead of having a % complete, have it so that group can define it themselves and say, we're going to define what that success rating looks like ourselves, and then we can track it more easily, rather than it being a bit set. This is the standard formula. That's where I'm sort of coming from, whether people I've got that feedback. People obviously don't think the % complete works. I'm not alone in that then.
It's a good suggestion just to jump in, Anne, and work with Claire with Bush Heritage, and have been talking about exactly the same thing recently. So I think there are ways, until that field is available in Marathi, they can still use the field against that % progress, and you can leave that part blank, but then still put some details in and come up with some agreed kind of rules around what terminology you use. On track, achieved. Pip suggested some more before. Yes, but that would be great in the future if it was more flexible.
Yeah. Well, Bridget, I was just thinking, because those ones are relevant to strategy and activities, the sort of completed, etc. And I was just looking and thinking about work that Saris and I have done for WWF around tracking goals and objectives, where, Bridget, we have used exactly as you suggested, achieved, partially achieved. And I was going, we've been trying to get WWF Malaysia to actually use Marathi. They're really good at like doing their process, but I was going, oh, and I had to open up Marathi, and I was just going, oh, they couldn't do it. Damn it, it's right. You're right. So I do think that's something we could put, maybe even as the, a few people in Australia CCNet, that would actually be quite helpful to be able to do that, because again, in a practical sense, certainly for some of the evaluations we've been doing, we have actually been looking at those sort of criteria of achieved, partially achieved, no longer relevant as criteria against objectives and goals. So we could even, Haojin's nodding, we could even enlist John Morrison in bringing a piece of the WWF PPMS. Sorry, that's very jargony. WWF, like lots of them, have renamed the open standards, but they do have some quite nice guidance on evaluations in particular.
I was going to suggest that, but I wasn't sure if that would scare people away, the kind of monitoring, the detail for monitoring tables involved.
Yeah, thanks, Bridget. Those are great resources. Yeah. How are we going? We're just about at 2 o'clock.
Yeah, we are. So I think that was a really super interesting discussion. We managed it because we only had a few questions, was to actually get into quite a lot of detail. And yeah, Michael, thanks for sharing your threat assessment. I can see that there is a bit of a mix of, some of them are what we'd call stresses. And so it's thinking about what's causing that stress, and is that already identified in the list. But yeah, we'll get back to you. I think I'll talk to Leah about the next session with you, and
Sorry, Leah.
support.
It'll be helpful in the long run.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, it just flags for us that we need to do a bit of work to pick those apart before we just jump into all of that. So thank you very much.
Yep. And hopefully, Michael and Annie, we've convinced you that this group of people love chewing this stuff over and love helping. So we'll try and hold these sessions again. Please encourage others who are using it to come along.
Wonderful. Yeah, I definitely
and tap
will.
into the mind. And we'd love to see you guys again, obviously.
Yeah.
But really that's the purpose of this network, is to sort of share thoughts on how to do things better. So
so it's coming along to sessions like this, but also the listserv, is also, if you've got a question, to put it out, and tap into the network on, so if you've got questions around the process or anything to do with
so, again, just assuming Michael and Annie, you're on the global CCNet listserv. If you're not, you can either work out how to do that via the CCNet website, or just check in with Saris or Leah. Read that.
Yep, easy to do.
Yeah, but Nat put a good question up there.
Oh, yes.
So I've been watching those responses with interest.
I was going to ask that of all of you, but all good.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us, everyone. And please, we won't have another webinar, I think, this year. We'll probably November try to do like we'll do an online gathering and see if we can get some in-person stuff happening in different regions. We'll either towards the end of the year or in the new year, and then we'll start back with a webinar kind of series next year. But if you do have any topics, please do also let us know as well, so you can email the committee on that.
Yep, or we love show and tell.
Yes.
To show us one of your projects.
Yep,
and you can do show and tell with questions if you like.
when the Southern Plan of Management is ready to be shared, that would be a great show and tell.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have a draft someday soon.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thanks everyone.
Okay.
Thanks so much.